Hey guys, in this episode we're looking into the world of homeopathy with Lisa Strbac. Lisa is a certified homeopath and I'm glad we have her on the show to explain how homeopathy works and how she got into it. I hope you enjoy this one. Lisa, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So many questions. The main body of the whole conversation is about homeopathy, what it is. But I'd like to first want you to give us an introduction of how did this all begin for you?
Yeah, good question. I'll try and keep it brief because I could talk for an hour just about that. But I mean, I used to be a skeptic. I used to work in corporate tax. I was completely immersed in the corporate world and really far removed away from anything holistic. I just wasn't brought up like that. And basically my daughter, when she was just 4 years old, developed an autoimmune condition.
Wow.
And we went to get lots of help and no one could help us basically. And started to sort of realize, well, I'm on my own, I've got to fix this because she's only 4 and she can't have this for the rest of her life. So I started reading loads. I just started devouring as much information as possible as to how this could have happened. And I came across a book called Toxic World, Toxic People, which was all about how we get toxic overload and then we get sick and health issues can develop. And there was a chapter in it written by Jane Donegan, who's a doctor, but she's also a homeopath. And I read this chapter and I thought, I've got to see if she can help, because she really sort of seemed to understand the holistic way of healing. And because she was a doctor, it was more palatable to me, she was still a bit more mainstream. So I went to a talk that she did. She said to me, yes, I can help you, but come to a talk that I'm doing about raising healthy children, and you might understand how you got to this point. And then I'll see you and your daughter. And I mean, the talk was amazing. It was all about really terrain theory, but she never used those words. She talked about toxic overload and how we suppress symptoms and how it drives disease deeper and why fevers are good and why we shouldn't use cowpot. And I was just like, oh my God, I've done everything wrong. And me and my husband were like, oh my God, we've just, screwed everything up. But, actually, we realized she's only 4. There's a lot we can do to undo this. So I then went to see Jane for a homeopathy appointment, and it just seemed, I have to say, really ridiculous, because with homeopathy, you treat the whole person. And with children in particular, they're very connected to their parents still. So she wanted to know about my pregnancy, about the birth, about what dreams my daughter had, what food she liked, disliked, everything about her, as well as medical history and health issues and things like that. And I came out and I was still a bit like, this just seems, like twiddle twaddle. It just seems really sort of not serious, so I kind of shelved the remedies. And it was only when we were working with like a functional medicine practitioner, she actually said to me, Lisa, try the homeopathy, you've got nothing to lose. And I used it for my daughter. I gave it to my daughter, didn't even know she'd taken it. I put it in some water. I gave her a sip of the water and I couldn't believe the reaction. She instantly started screaming her ears hurt, which I now realize is a return of old symptoms, because she'd had loads of ear infections as sort of a toddler, and we'd suppressed them with antibiotics and Calpol. So what was happening, and she never interestingly had pain when she had these ear infections when she was younger. So it was like she had a return of old symptoms and the body was doing what it was meant to do, like the disease which had been suppressed was now coming out. And over the space of 48 hours, she had rashes. It was such a profound sort of reaction that I was like, what have I witnessed? This is like, you go on Google. I sort of went back on Google to look what's homeopathy, and Wikipedia comes up and it says it's pseudoscience and placebo at best. And I thought, well, that's not the case. And I was so just amazed by what I'd witnessed that I just devoured every single piece of information I could to learn more. And I knew instinctually, I knew when that reaction happened with my daughter that it was stuff that needed to come out. It was true healing, and we kind of never looked back. So after that, within the space of a few weeks, I went to study homeopathy. I'd signed up for 4-year studying to become a homeopath, and that was it. You know, you don't find homeopathy, it finds you, and it certainly did. And yeah, I left my corporate job, and that's all and it opened up so much more, which maybe we'll talk about. But just when you see these remedies can stimulate self-healing, because there's kind of nothing in them materially, which we'll probably come on to, it just blew my mind and opened up the world to actually there's so much more out there that we haven't been told. So yeah, that was the start of the big awakening.
Yeah, and every time I hear the story from you, it's like you're saying it for the first time. That's what I love about the story, because it's so profound, your experience. And what I found interesting is, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I did a quick research about how many people in the world actually use homeopathy. And apparently, according to hri-research.org, they say 200 million use homeopathy worldwide and 6 million in the UK. Now, for those who think it's quackery and don't believe in it, why are so many people using it? That's one thing. And another thing, I remember this documentary I watched years ago, and it still sticks in my head. It was a documentary about homeopathy, and they're saying how in the 1998 World Cup, the French national team that won the World Cup, they used homeopathy for their injuries, and they found that it helped. I thought, wow, okay, that's another thing on my mind. And then there's two more other things. The other thing was the Queen herself had homeopathy pillules in her bag when she was traveling. And then the last thing that still sticks in my mind is on one of your posts, you recommended everyone to read The Impossible Cure.
Yeah.
Amazing book. And Dr. Kushmark, someone you obviously know, she mentioned on her Facebook page that she recommended everyone to read that in her classes.
Yeah.
And in the book, what I found profound was the guy who started homeopathy, his statue is in Washington, and it's still there erected. So I'm thinking, I'm just there, I'm reading it. I was like, and that's when I don't know if you remember, I text you saying that I've just read the book, and my colleague who I work with said that his daughter's got autism, and I was just reading about it in the Impossible Cure book. So, and then I guess that can go into like the arts of energy and all the rest of it. So I'm sure we can briefly go into that. So yeah, I just found it a bit profound that, you know, it's been around clearly for a very long time, but it's not mainstream. And I guess the question is, I'd like to ask you, why do you think it isn't mainstream as it is? And
good question. Do you know what? To flip it on its head, how amazing is it that homeopathy has survived despite all the bad press out there, despite when you Google it, it says it's pseudoscience, despite it coming up as quackery, and yet I mean, that figure of 200 million is an old figure, actually, and homeopathy, I think, is growing by 20% each year. So why does it still continue? And there's a great quote by Mark Twain, and I can't remember it. He says something like, you should feel grateful that despite the attempts to discredit homeopathy, it still continues. And he wrote, I think that was in like 1900 that he said that. So I could say loads of reasons. There's no money to be made out of healthy people. There's no money to be made out of remedies. You can't patent them. They're made from nature. They, you know, it's individualized, so you can't do large scale studies. I mean, there are some studies out there to support it, and there are big ones like the Cuban leptospirosis outbreak. If anyone wants
I'm glad you mentioned that one, because during the pandemic, there's quite a few homeopaths are coming out saying you should use this, you should use that. And I emailed one homeopath, and I was just like, oh, you know, I was just curious about any studies about vaccination and homeopathy, and she sent me that study. It's a legit study where I think they used a homeoprophylaxis. Is that
that's right? Yeah.
Instead of vaccination, because it was cheaper and it helped. I think majority of people. I think it was 80%. I think, I'm not sure.
I think it's more than that. I think it was over 90, and they couldn't, because it's in Cuba. Every year they had an outbreak of leptospirosis, and I think they ran out of vaccination one particular year, so they used homeopathy preventatively and over 2.1 million people, and the effects were amazing. But to your point of the original question, was that study was done by a regular doctor. All his previous studies have been published in really prestigious medical journals. He couldn't get that study published anywhere other than Homeopathy Journal. No
Wow.
one else would accept it. So why don't more people know about it? Why? I think it's because there is a lot of stuff comes down to money, and there's no money to be made in homeopathy. And that, I would say, is one of the, we live in a corporate world, so that's probably one of the main reasons. And yeah, the royal family, their primary physicians are homeopaths. Peter Fisher, who was an amazing homeopath, he sadly passed away a few years ago. He very, very outspoken homeopath, and he was the Queen's main doctor and the royal family's doctor.
Wow.
So, and they still have a homeopath. I'm not sure who that is actually, since Peter passed away, but and all the great sports. There's a book, it's by Dana Allman. I need to try and remember the title, but it talks about, I think it's called The Homeopathic Revolution, and it talks about all the famous people that use it back. Rockefeller had his own homeopath. So
Interesting.
Rockefeller said homeopathy is an aggressive and progressive step in medicine. And then sadly, as part of the Flexner report, homeopaths back, what was it, in the early 1900s, they weren't allowed to be medical doctors, so they basically had to split, and that's where naturopathy and homeopathy and acupuncture, all the original sort of medicines, sort of fell away. And at that time you had Hahnemann statue in Washington DC. So there's so much info out there. It's really, when you start delving into it, but I'm aware actually people want to know probably about homeopathy, what it is, how it works. So
yeah, that's right. So because I want to go back a little bit, because you mentioned the terrain theory earlier, just in case no one knows what that actually is. So let's just start with, what is homeopathy?
Yeah, so homeopathy, it was founded by Hahnemann, Dr. Hahnemann, over 200 years ago. And he was a medical doctor, but he was really disillusioned with the way medicine was going back then. So he was doing some translation, medical translation, and he came across a medical article which said that Peruvian bark was a great cure for malaria because it had astringent properties. And he thought, well, that's strange, because why don't other herbs and drugs that have astringent properties also cure malaria? So being a curious kind of guy, he took some Peruvian bark and he noticed that he got the symptoms of malaria. And he was like, this is interesting, because if someone has malaria and takes Peruvian bark, they get well, yet I'm healthy and I get the symptoms. So this is where this like cures like principle comes in, which is what the very foundation of homeopathy. But he started to kind of tweak about with it a bit, because he thought, well, actually, if you take it in a material dose, it's toxic. If you're healthy, you get toxic symptoms. So he thought, is there a way that I can make these Peruvian bark non-toxic? And so we're not quite sure in the history books exactly how he came to this next step, but he basically potentized the Peruvian bark, which means he diluted it. Now we know if we just dilute something, if we just water it down, it does nothing, it has no medicinal properties. But he did this extra step where he succussed it, which is basically he shook it and he watered it down, and he would shake it in between watering it down. And that, we think, is what enables the energy to be released. And so you ended up, it would go through multiple dilutions. You'd end up having no material dose left. So if you looked at it under a microscope, there'd be no Peruvian bark left, yet it would still work as actually more effectively, but there'd be no chemical basis to it because it works on energy. And although this might sound, people not familiar, really far-fetched, actually, if you look at some of the real cutting-edge research that's coming out on water and water having memory, and all the work done by people like Dr. Luc Montagnier, who was a Nobel Prize winner, who discovered the HIV virus, he actually said that he could see the basis of how homeopathy worked, because there's so much information coming out about water having memory and being particularly structured water and living water. So really, that is how homeopathy was discovered. There are thousands of remedies. So the first remedy that was discovered was Peruvian bark, but then Hahnemann started seeing, oh, you know, what's the medicinal properties and the healing properties of arsenicum or pulsatilla, which is a windflower, and started looking at all different herbs and minerals. And so we have now thousands and thousands of remedies. And what we're always trying to do with that basis of like cures like is we're always trying to match the individual's symptoms to a remedy that has those exact matching symptoms. So with homeopathy, you're never treating the named condition. You're never saying, oh, what is eczema, coming to that, what are the remedies for eczema? No, you're always treating that person, and they're, even with something like flu, we're all going to have our own experience of how we experience the flu. It might be similar, so we might need similar remedies, but each person will have a slightly different experience. Like you might find that you're more achy and chilly and weak, and you're a bit more anxious, and you feel worse in the middle of the night. So you might perhaps need arsenicum, as well. I might find I've got a splitting headache, and I'm really thirsty, and I'm really irritable, and I'm more bryonia. So there are two big flu remedies, but we all have our own slightly different experience of these symptoms.
Okay, interesting. So how does one use homeopathy? So let's say I had the flu. I've got my kit, thanks to you. I got after the house, I got it. I've got the kit. So I'm looking at it. So what do I do?
Right, so this is where homeopathy can be initially tricky to use at home, because basically everything you've been taught is almost the exact opposite for homeopathy. And it takes a little bit of skill to try and find the remedy. So you can buy kits, you can buy great books, and the best thing to do is just to get a really good book, or even the kits come with books, and they will explain. You'll look it up, flu, and it will have maybe 5 or 6 remedies listed, and it will say, if you've got flu and you are better for warmth, take this remedy. If you actually are thirsty, take that remedy. And they'll give you more than that to go on, but you're always just trying to find the remedy that best matches. And you will need help, something to look it up to begin with. Even homeopaths can't remember every single remedy.
I remember when I went to my homeopath years ago, and I was telling him about my issue, and he bought this big red book. I'm sure you know which one.
Yeah, I've got the big red book.
The big red book, and he was like, did your grandmother have cancer? I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah. And he was like, all right. And then he was just asking these questions, but kind of like relating that, how does he know this? Like, what's like you said, you got to unlearn everything that you've kind of learned in terms of the allopathic method, which is basically like the modern day medicine for those that don't know. They come in pills and they come in liquid form. Is there any, and if you just want to explain what kind of forms they come in?
Yeah, so generally, like the bog standard kits will come in pills. Now, all remedies are made initially in water. So remember what I said about Hahnemann getting the original substance, and he'd kind of add it to water and dilute it down. So all remedies are initially in water, and you can get some remedies that are in liquid, but generally what happens is when you buy the remedies from a homeopathic pharmacy, they would have taken that liquid and they will have impregnated some sugar pills with it. They're easier to carry around, they're easier to take, kids like them. So we generally say our homeopathy sugar pills, but it still originates. Well, I was about to say it originates in liquid. No, it originates from an original substance, which is then potentized and put into liquid, and then they're put onto pills, which are just the carrier. So so you can get different types, but generally it will normally be the sugar pills.
Okay, so there's the pills and then the liquid, because the ones that I have from my previous homeopath, it's got some alcohol in there. So is that to preserve it? Is that there's alcohol in there? It's medicinal alcohol in there?
Exactly. Normally organic brandy, which they're originally
so that's interesting, because one person I was watching on YouTube about, and she was saying how her mom makes it in brandy, but then I'm thinking but alcohol in brandy, isn't that like toxic for the body as well? Like, how does it?
It's literally a drop, and it's not pure alcohol as well. So yes, and some people you can get from pharmacies these remedies made up in water. I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, the water ones won't last as long, but for most people, it's going to be sugar pills, and you don't need to worry too much about sort of how they're made behind the scenes. But yes, if you were to get liquid, just be mindful they might have alcohol in. If you don't want to have alcohol, it's the tiniest drop, so it's to preserve it. But yes, alcohol's not good for us. I agree.
For someone, so I'll give you my backstory. So I remember years ago, I was curious about homeopathy. I didn't go into it. I remember I was speaking to a colleague, and then he was just like, homeopathy? He was just like, this is rubbish. Like, my wife tried it, it didn't work. So my question is, I know what the answer is, but I'd like for you to tell everyone, why doesn't it work for some people?
Oh, yeah, good question. There can be so many reasons. So I did a post about this on Instagram. I have to look it up. But the main reason, well, there's several reasons. So the first thing is, quite often people will go, oh, my friend tried that remedy for X, and then they go and take it. Remember, we're always treating the individual. So that's the first thing. Quite often it can be you didn't get the right remedy. It wasn't the right match. And particularly when you're first starting out at home, and this is why it's so important to kind of learn the fundamentals, either get a good book, go on a short course, go on YouTube, like just get information from free accounts, Instagram, all of that, to just try and understand how it actually works, because you need to realize that you're treating the individual. So maybe you didn't get the right remedy, and if you don't get the right remedy, what I always say, if you've taken 2 or 3 doses, try the remedy that seems like the next best match. And this is only for acute illnesses. We should see a homeopath for chronic illnesses, which we can come on to, but let's come on to that in a moment. So 1, maybe you didn't get the right remedy. 2, what does healing actually look like? People often don't even know what healing looks like. So sometimes people will take a remedy. Take, for example, what happened to my daughter. She started screaming, her ears hurt, and then got rashes. Many people might think, oh my God, like it hasn't worked, it's made her worse, because they don't know what true healing actually looks like. And when you start looking into homeopathy, and this is one of the reasons I fell in love with it, was the whole philosophy and everything about it suddenly made perfect sense. And it spoke about the law of cure, and how when we actually really heal, things have to come out. There might be discharges or eliminations, that could even be words, you know, we might start dreaming more. Things move in terms of the most important organs, the least important organs. So if we're feeling anxious and we take a remedy, our anxiety might go, but we might get a rash, because our skin isn't as an important organ as our mind. We might get a return of old symptoms, things that weren't properly cured in the past. So that could be another reason that we don't actually even know what healing looks like. And I can tell you something, if you have a fever and you take a remedy, if you expect the fever to just suddenly disappear, then you have a fundamental lack of knowledge as to what healing looks like. And I've been there, so I say that not to pass judgment, but you know, the fever is the cure, and we've been taught to be very fearful of fevers, and people need to go and check out the nice guidelines on fever management, which says that actually, this is even the NHS says that you shouldn't use paracetamol or ibuprofen to suppress fevers. So there's so much unlearning that we have to do. So it could be that actually we are healing, but we don't recognize what healing looks like. And then sometimes remedies don't actually work, and there can be reasons for that too. So there could be reasons, there could be and this is more for chronic issues, where you should always work with a homeopath for really long-term things, because they've got lots of layers that could need unpicking. It's very hard to see yourself objectively. You know, when you've got something like flu, which is an acute issue, the symptoms really shout out. It's easier to find a remedy. But when we've got, say, something like an autoimmune condition or eczema, they normally have developed because layers and layers have over time, there's been lots of suppression, and a homeopath will help sort of unpick that. So so there could be things like maintaining causes, that you're living in an environment that made you sick. You know, maybe you are actually allergic to dairy and you continue to eat dairy, and your eczema is not going to heal. Maybe remedies could help you be more tolerant of dairy, but for some people, their constitutions just don't tolerate it. And so we have to sort of listen to what our body's doing. Maybe we're living in a really moldy house, and actually we need to reduce that toxic load to be able to heal. So there could be what we call a maintaining cause, or there could be a drug layer. So if we're heavily medicated, people that are heavily medicated often don't do as well on homeopathy, or they need a different way of being prescribed, because you've got that energy of that drug. You need to try and get through that energy of that drug, so it can kind of be a bit noisy for the body to hear the remedies. And then the other thing, which is going into sort of much deeper homeopathy issues, which but just to mention it for completeness, is inherited susceptibility, which we call miasms. Sometimes if there's an inherited taint, we call it, then that can block remedies. But there's again ways to deal with that. We can actually give anti-miasmatic remedies to help clear that. So a remedy not working or not working, it can be, well, maybe it was the wrong remedy, maybe it did work, or maybe actually it just gives a clue as to what else is going on, as to why that didn't work. So lots of reasons. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, it's fine. It's brilliant. Because there's a YouTube video of, I know you have those TED Talks on YouTube, and there's one guy, and I remember when I was searching stuff for homeopathy years ago, there's one guy, he was just saying that, oh, I can prove that homeopathy doesn't work. So he just stood in front of like hundreds of people in the crowd. He got a whole tub of homeopathic sleeping pills and he just downs them in one go. And he says, look, there you go. It doesn't work. I'm totally fine. No side effects, no whatsoever. Now, for me, correct me if I'm wrong, that's because he doesn't have sleeping issues, but he's just taking it anyway.
Yeah, so it's like it only works if you've got the symptoms. So it's not like taking a supplement.
Yeah.
Or something like that. You know, homeopathy, we don't take daily, we only take if we have symptoms that need treating. So if you had insomnia and you took a homeopathy remedy to help that matched your insomnia, you know, there's lots of remedies that could help with insomnia. So first of all, it's got to be the right match. Yeah. If you don't have symptoms of insomnia, it's not going to do anything. You know, that's why it's safe and non-toxic, because it doesn't do anything if you don't have the symptoms.
And like, we're currently in the season of my podcast is more based on children's health. So it's safe for adults, children, babies, pregnant women, isn't it?
Yep. But there's nothing else like it. Yeah. Animals, plants, you name it. If it's living, you can take it. Yeah.
But how would you give it to a plant? You just mix it in water and just pour it in?
Yeah, I tell you, this is a big area that's going to come through, is homeopathy for agriculture. You know, amazing how to have our soil is such poor quality. To make plant stronger and use homeopathy in agriculture, there's a lot of info out there that's coming up on that. So yeah, definitely an area to watch.
Great. So earlier you spoke about what does healing actually look like, and I think again going back to like we have to unlearn what we've learned. We see a side effect of anything, or an effect of any sort of, let's say the flu, for example, panic. But actually, from my view is like body's just trying to detox itself from everything that's going on. So for me, I mean, ever since I got into wellness, nutrition, holistic way of living, I haven't taken paracetamol since 2013, since I found out about this stuff. And I didn't even know about homeopathy. I only started using homeopathy probably like 5 years ago. Homeopathy is all about detoxing, isn't it? Ultimately, right?
Well, I'd say it's even more than that, because it's about maintaining balance and getting the body back into balance. Our bodies are amazing self-healing machines. You know, we are meant to be able to self-heal. I mean, we do self-heal. No one takes it for granted. If you cut yourself, or if you have major surgery, you can have your gallbladder removed or other major surgery, break bones, and you will have no doubt in your mind that you can heal yourself from that. You know, you can be cut open and you know that the body can do that. But we seem to lose faith that it can do it in other areas. And I think it's because we're so suppressed, we're so chronically sick, we're so out of balance that the body almost, for some people, can't self-heal properly. It's got stuck. So remedies stimulate the vital force, which is our body, to heal itself. It just stimulates self-healing, and we need healing generally when we've got stuck or out of balance. So it's more than about detoxing, I think, because actually you can give remedies to boost your constitution, but but very, very few of us are at that level, you know, where we're at a really healthy baseline. We've normally all got layers that we need to work on. So yes, it can help hugely with detox, massively, and it can detox specific substances as well. But yeah, it's about really bringing balance back and restoring health.
So I mentioned earlier, I haven't used paracetamol for like since 2013. So could you just talk about paracetamol a little bit, especially for children as well? Like, why is it actually so bad? I know what it is, but you explained it really well. And we went on I was on your course, if you remember, the flu one, and I thought it was brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, if you could just talk about NICE, the government company that tells us what to do for flu for kids.
So yeah, so the NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Health and Excellence, which is basically writes the guidance for NHS. And if you look at the guidance for fevers and fever management in children, it specifically says, and this was added in 2013, that paracetamol or ibuprofen should not be used with the sole aim of reducing fevers in children. Now, most people will not believe that, and most doctors don't seem to be, well, I say most doctors, I don't want to pass judgment, but I know that some of my friends, when they've gone to say A&E with their children because they've had high fevers, they've been told by medical staff, you've got to reduce that fever for the sake of reducing the fever, even though the NHS guideline says not to do that. It does say, you know, if the child's in distress, then use it. I mean, that obviously, if your child's in pain and suffering and you need to reduce their pain, that's completely different. But we don't just give paracetamol or ibuprofen to reduce fevers. And the guidance also says it does not reduce the risk of febrile convulsions, which most people, if you ask most parents, you know, why do they give paracetamol, they'll say, because I don't want my child to get a convulsion or risk having a seizure.
But what is the thing about that? Because that's the first thing people say. They say, oh, I don't want them to have a convulsion, that's why we're giving it, just in case. But correct me if I'm wrong, the chances are actually quite low.
Yeah, and also there's some evidence even to suggest that actually it's not the fever per se, it's how quickly it spikes and falls. And so if you're artificially intervening with paracetamol, then you could have those spikes actually more so. So, you know, it's the other thing is paracetamol reduces glutathione. Glutathione is a vital antioxidant which helps us detox, and so when we take paracetamol, the liver has now got to detox the paracetamol, which is a major component of our immune system, our liver, and it now doesn't have reduced levels of glutathione. So it really, you know, when you start looking into it, you sort of realize actually something which we just give willy-nilly. You know, I dread to think how many bottles of Calpol I would have got through for my daughter before I knew better. You know, I used to give it for teething, and I could have just given homeopathy. You know, and this is why I feel so passionate about people getting a homeopathy kit and learning how to use it, because you can use it from everything from pains and teething, and you can use it for fever, but remember, the fever is the cure. It will make the patient feel more comfortable, and it might bring it to a more sensible level if it's really high, but it's not just going to get rid of that, because homeopathy doesn't suppress, it just stimulates self-healing. So you're just going to get through it more quickly, and sometimes it does just suddenly go, because the body goes, hey, I don't need this, and can shift it, but it won't suppress symptoms in the same way that a lot of conventional medicines, you know, antibiotics or antihistamines or antipyretics, the way that these conventional medicines suppress symptoms.
Great. I forgot to ask earlier, a lot of homeopaths tell me that medicine and homeopathy can actually work together. Because I know you mentioned earlier as well that when someone's highly medicated, then the energy balance is a bit, you know, there can be a clash there. But generally speaking, someone who's just like on, I said, not too much medication, I don't even know what the levels are to that. What's the definition of that? They say that you can use them together and it will take out the toxic effects. Is that?
Well, you can use, I wouldn't like to make such blanket statements, but you can use homeopathy alongside any medication. So they don't interact. They're working on completely different planes. Conventional medicines are working on a material level, and homeopathy is just boosting self-healing. So yes, you can use them alongside anything. And you can use some remedies to help counteract the effects of certain medications. And everyone's different. It really depends on the individual. Some people that are highly medicated, they can take remedies and they're still going to work absolutely just fine. But for some people, they might just be a bit less effective, or you just might need to dose a bit differently. It really depends, because homeopathy is so individual. We're also individual, and it just comes down to the individual person. But you can definitely use it alongside, for sure. But just if you're really heavily medicated, then it just might not work as effectively, but it will still do something.
I love the story what you said in that course that we did, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is how I see it. So even though like I'm more into my nutrition and well-being, a bit of homeopathy because I'm learning about it, it's better for my wife to go find someone else to do it rather than me. And I find that that's only because she's seen my struggles trying to learn all this stuff and, practicing things, stuff like that. And I don't know why, I don't know if that's why your husband has seen a homeopath himself. Is that, I just want to double check.
Yeah, so I don't treat, I want to treat for acute. So for acute illnesses, I'll self-treat, I'll treat my family and friends. But for really in-depth chronic stuff, you should always work with an objective homeopath, because I know everything. Like, for example, I know everything about this, or not everything, but I know so much. I've got my own take on.
Yeah.
But so much is actually how you present it to the homeopath. There shouldn't be any, well, I know that you did that last week, or any of that kind of stuff.
But your husband might be thinking, hold on, this is how I see my world, right?
Yeah, exactly, because it's how it's all your energy and your experience of the world. And when you are too close to someone, you start to project onto it, and you've got too much history, memories, all of that. So yeah, even homeopaths will generally see homeopaths. We won't self-treat because you can't, it's very hard to be objective. It's so funny when I've gone to see my homeopath, I've like tried to self-treat, maybe in acute, and I haven't quite, it's sort of lingered on.
Yeah.
And then as I'm talking out loud, I'm like, oh my God, now I'm talking out loud, I just need pulsatilla, because I couldn't see it, because they'll ask me questions and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not very thirsty, or I'm this, and I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen just before, but you don't see it in yourself. And it's the same with anyone close to you. Yeah.
So here's a question. So interesting enough, years ago, I work in my office. I work with a doctor. He's a part-time doctor. He actually works in a hospital, and he works in an office part-time. And years ago, when I asked him about homeopathy, he's like, "Oh, it's hogwash. There's no evidence that it works. The normal blah blah blah." And then years later, he was telling me about, he's gone to see a homeopath for his son's hay fever. I was like, oh, that's interesting. He said, homeopath said to him that for his son's hay fever, it's ideally to take it 6 weeks before. So this is where I got a bit confused, because it feels like different homeopaths have their own way of working, but also is like for hay fever, for example, isn't it meant to help there and then rather than 6 weeks before? That's why I got a bit confused with that. I was like, huh? I thought the homeopathy was meant to be like the medicine that will sort it out.
Okay, so good question. So first of all, yes, homeopaths will generally do each one might do things slightly differently, but with hay fever, there's two things. So hay fever is a chronic issue. So you need to deal with the underlying susceptibility, and you want to do that outside of hay fever season. But then two, you get acute symptoms. So you can give homeopathy remedies in hay fever season for the acute symptoms, but that's not going to get to the underlying root cause. It could do if you just happen to need the same remedy, but generally when you're in that acute state, so say I'm in hay fever season and I've got loads of sneezing and scratchy, itchy eyes, I'll take one of the big, maybe hay fever remedies like euphrasia. But actually, why have I got hay fever in the first place? That's a much deeper, that's part of my constitution, part of inheritability, all of that. That's going to need much deeper treatment, constitutional treatment we call it, where we look at the whole individual and give them a remedy for that. Now, you could do that during hay fever season, but you're not really going to know if it's working because you're being exposed to it at that moment. So we say it's better with hay fever to treat actually sort of autumn, winter, before hay fever season kicks in, because then you go into hay fever season and you can then see, what are my symptoms like? Has it helped or not? And what we generally find, again, it's slightly different, but maybe 2 seasons, you'll need to see a homeopath for constitutional treatment for a couple of seasons to completely get rid of it. And for me personally, I've had eczema in the past, I've had hay fever. It definitely took probably 2 seasons to completely get rid of my hay fever symptoms. So I would treat myself with acute remedies in the actual hay fever season, just on that more superficial level, like I would like flu or colds or whatever, and then see a homeopath to deal with that underlying susceptibility. Why have I got it in the first place?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. If you could just quickly go over a walkthrough of, like, let's say I've come to see a homeopath, what am I expecting to happen? In my experience, my first homeopath, I think, was on the other end of the spectrum, because he's using like bioresonance and things like that. And then as I'm reading more about it, no one's talking about bioresonance majority of the time. They're talking about like more of the classical homeopathy. So they can't realize there's different types. So what is someone expecting to happen once they visit a homeopath? Like, what is the process?
Yeah, sure. So there you get, so just to say quickly, you do get bioresonance practitioners, but that's not homeopathy. So bioresonance practitioners might be homeopaths as well, or use homeopathy as well, but that is not what homeopaths will do. So nearly all homeopaths, regardless of whether they're classical or more practical or doing more detox, whatever their approach is, it will always consist of treating the individual. So normally it will be like a 1 hour to 90-minute initial appointment, and it's treating you. So you talk about what you've actually come for, but that's often the least relevant, not the least relevant, but the thing that we're not so interested in, the thing that brings someone there. If you're coming about your eczema, actually, okay, we want to know about your eczema. When's it better? When's it worse? But that's not going to find us a remedy to actually resolve that. What we want to know about is, what are you like? What's your personality like? What food do you like? What are you averse to? What do you crave? Not what you should be eating. When I see patients and they're like, I generally, it's like, no, I don't want to hear about that. I want to hear about your desires and your aversions.
When I get my clients to take my questionnaire, and it's very general, I was like, no, I need to know everything, because it's the only way I can help you. So it's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And then it's even things like, digestion. Are you thirsty? Do you like your drinks cold or not? What seasons do you like? What makes you happy? Do you cry often? Do you get angry? The more information that you can give, the more we're going to get an energetic match to you. But having said that, if someone's really closed and doesn't want to talk either, then you start to go down the route of, there are these remedies that are more closed and more. So even that it's not like you have to. If that's not your way, then the homeopath will be able to read that energy. So you just want to, medical history as well, what your even childhood illnesses, what maybe life events you've had, has there been any trauma? Because nearly always something big preceded an illnesses. They do not just come out of nowhere. They might be built upon time because of terrible diet or other living environment, or maybe there was a shock or some trauma, and then actually a few weeks later or months later you got this health issue which seemed to come out of nowhere. So it's a very in-depth consultation. It's unlike anything else. And then generally you'd have follow-ups of 4 to 8 weeks later and the follow-ups more important in some ways than that initial one, because as I said at the start, for all those reasons that remedies might not work, or maybe it did, and the homeopath will need to explain, you know, what's happened, and it's peeling back layers. So you always want to see, you know, what's changed and shifted. So it's a very different experience from seeing a conventional doctor.
And they go on for about 2 hours, don't they?
Yeah, about 1 to 2 hours normally.
And again, going back to the beginning when I was saying about you know, so many people are using it, like whenever I ring my homeopath, it's rammed. Like I have to wait for months for an appointment because it's always full. So there's another thing, is like he must be doing something right, or a homeopath must be doing something right if they're always busy, right? So just a quick fire round, nothing to do with homeopathy. Okay. What advice would you give to your younger self? Go quickly answer. You got a second.
Feel the fear and do it anyway.
Okay, great. What are you most passionate about?
Homeopathy.
Okay, great. Last question. If there was a movie based on your life, what would the title be?
Oh God, that's probably, oh God.
Oh God, there you go. Yeah, I can take that for now. Maybe if we do another one in the future, it might be a different title. But yeah, oh God, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, great. So I want to ask about your views on autoimmunity. So what do you, as a homeopath, when you see someone's got an autoimmune condition, is it just a case of, again, we're treating the individual? Because at first glance, autoimmunity basically means that the immune system's attacking itself, right? So what do you think about that?
So on my introduction to homeopathy course, I actually have this quote. I talk about suppression at the beginning and why we've got explosion of chronic illnesses and autoimmunity. And there's a quote which I think it's Wilson and Duff, and it says, autoimmunity is the price we pay for the eradication of infectious diseases. We've suppressed disease and we've driven it deeper. So why does a child that has ear infections that's suppressed go on to develop eczema or asthma? You know, there's a clear link, an autoimmune condition. So obviously there's different levels of autoimmune conditions, but from a homeopathic perspective, it's suppression. We've suppressed ordinary illnesses deeper and deeper, and then we start to develop these autoimmune conditions. And then there's also, you know, that inheritability. So we all have our own unique way of expressing symptoms. I might be more prone to sore throats, someone else to nausea and vomiting. It depends. We call them miasms in homeopathy, but they are genetic inherited taints. So one is the cancer miasm. If we're more carcinosin, then we are more likely to get autoimmune issues. The same if we're more syphilitic, which is self-destructive, we're more likely to perhaps get these neurodegenerative illnesses like MS or motor neuron disease. If we're more tubercular, we're more likely to get chest infections and ear and throat. So it just depends as well, like on our genetic makeup and what we've inherited from our parents as well. But we can clear that. But I'd say first and foremost, it is because of suppression. And if you look, you know, we are meant to get childhood illnesses and we're meant to get them at certain ages. And it's really interesting, actually. These miasms in homeopathy, each of the miasms links to a particular childhood illness. So when we're suppressing these childhood illnesses and we're not getting them naturally, you know, we're actually creating these much more chronic issues. So yeah, it's so
interesting. It's so interesting because, like, you know, I can imagine for someone who has no idea about this homeopathy and healing, detoxing, you know, how to have a healthy body, what they're eating, how they're living.
They need to read Dissolving Illusions by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, and you will completely have a different perspective on everything after reading that.
The pictures when they got the 6-year-old kid holding things on their back just to work. And one of the other main things was like cramped conditions. Whenever I hear in the council in Birmingham, or even when I hear about in London where they say they make sure that the house is not crowded anymore. I always think about that book because back then the houses were crowded, the sewage, no refrigeration, and some biological engineer that I follow, he was just saying that it wasn't medicine, it was actually just a cleaner living life.
Yeah. And do you know what, I've been there, you know, at the start of my journey where I was completely as mainstream in my thinking as anyone else. And I've gone through that process, you know, which is why I really empathize and relate to people that on that journey starting out. You know, I used to think homeopathy was a load of old twiddle twaddle, and I will say that, you know, and now I can't be more vocal about it. But if you want to go down that route, just, you know, to start actually, if you're worried about suppressing illnesses or not suppressing illnesses, just read Dissolving Illusions, because it will completely give you a different perspective. And Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, who wrote the book, was as mainstream as they used to come as well. She wrote the book because as a very, very respected kidney specialist doctor, she noticed that her patients that were on dialysis who were getting the flu vaccine were then suddenly really declining in health, and she started to suggest that they should just wait to get their flu vaccine. And she then started to get silenced, and she started to do some research and went down a rabbit hole. But yeah, read the book, it's amazing.
I mentioned this wife will kill me, as I mentioned earlier, eczema. So gone through a stage where it's getting really bad, and she's had it for a very long time. And I've heard a lot of stories about how homeopathy is amazing for eczema. And to be honest, we did it with our daughter, and it did disappear, but it did come back. So what would you say about homeopathy and eczema?
Well, I used to have horrendous eczema. You know, my eczema was so bad that I remember being back in my corporate job, like bleeding and weeping all over the desk, and like first aid having to come and wrap my hands up. And as you can see, my hands are perfectly fine now. But so what I would say, something like eczema, to use my own experience, we're susceptible. Like I throw things out on my skin. If I'm gonna, like, so when I'm not at full health, my skin will be the first. So like my hands will start going dry, and I'm like, okay, listen to my body, something's up. If I'm upset, during COVID, I got eczema back because I was so angry about everything that was going on. So we have to listen. But I mean, eczema can take about 2 years to resolve with homeopathy.
Really?
There's not a quick, it's not, and that's something, it's not a quick fix. There's no quick fix, and there's no magic pill. And eczema is usually a lot of layers, different with kids where there's not so much going on and things can return. Sometimes maybe she needs a miasmatic remedy, or, you know, just needs to repeat the remedy she had that helped. But you need to work with the homeopathy. Obviously look at diet, you know, is there things like gluten, or are you sensitive to gluten or dairy? Gluten, glyphosate, you know, I think it's so toxic these days. I
don't touch it. Like I literally and when I say, oh, I don't eat bread, and they're like, everyone just looks at me funny. You don't eat bread, you don't drink pasteurized milk. I find it funny. I actually find it funny.
People are waking up. But yeah, so I think you obviously have to look at everything else, but you know, quite often there can be a life event around the time it started, which gives an indication of what remedies you might need. But you know, in my experience with eczema, when I first started to see a homeopath, it got worse before it got better. And what was really interesting over the years, I mean, I'd used so many steroids to suppress my symptoms, and my eczema actually, it started off on this hand, on this finger, and then I used steroids and it got worse, and then it spread and it moved across over to my left hand. When I started to see the homeopath, it was on my left hand. And this is like return of old symptoms, and the things go back in the reverse order. Yeah. I saw my eczema with my own eyes travel back to my it took, I say, over months, you know, each time I took a remedy, it would get a bit better, but I could see it kind of moving across. And then it went from my left hand and it ended up back on this finger. And I knew without any shadow of a doubt that was it. It was going to go now, because it finally ended up back where it had begun, and it did. It takes time.
It takes time. Okay, great. Paper remedies. Now, so years ago, I read about that guy called something Inamoto who did the
Masaru Moto, Dr. Masaru Moto.
That's the one, yeah. And he did the experiments with water, and he found that basically if you attach basically water has memory, has feeling. So if you attach a word against that, water, it basically it has different crystals when it analyzes it. So, and I saw your your recent post, you're saying that you thought this was tittle tattle as well. So what do you think of it now then? Because I tried it and I was like, I didn't really feel much. So then I just left it as it is. I didn't feel homeopathy or anything. So what do you think?
I think if you look at Veda Austin's work, who is advancing Dr. Masaru Emoto's work. So she's got a Instagram page called Veda Austin Water, and she does crystallography, is that how you say it, where she gets water and she partly freezes it and she'll put it next to objects, or she'll look at things like eggs that are free range eggs versus caged eggs, and then freeze it and look at the patterns and how much nicer, like more beautiful, the well structured the pattern is in eggs that are free range. But interestingly, when the eggs from caged hens go near it, the goodness spreads to the to the cage. It's amazing the work she does. But she shows that things imprint into water, and she's even done it where she's written words and then done her water crystallizing technique, and that word has then, the image of the word has then appeared in the water. So it's really like far out and weird. But it made me realize, well, if that's the case, then paper remedies are where you write the word, the remedy down on a piece of paper, put water over it, and then sip. Now, obviously, I don't think that's going to be as effective as a regular remedy. But once, when I was desperate, I did try it out because I didn't have the remedy on me, and it worked. And I've done it a few times, and I know other people that have done paper remedies and they seem to work, but it is next level and it is a bit extra or whatever. So just stick to the normal remedies, but just to know, like, once your mind gets blown by actually homeopathy does work, and you can start looking into these other areas, you see, and you look at Dr. Masaru Emoto's work and Veda Austin, and you just see there's so much that we're only just beginning to realize.
Okay, great. Your top 3 remedies that you suggest for common acute situations?
Okay, so definitely aconite, which is like #1 for nipping colds in the bud or panic or anxiety, anything sudden onset, like it's sort of anti-inflammatory, but anything that comes on quickly. So if I feel like I'm coming down with a cold, that will be it, I'll take it. Then arnica for bumps and bruises, any accident, trauma. Third one, probably belladonna, or actually you could cheat. I'm going to cheat here. You could get ABC, which is a combination remedy that's done by Helios, and it's got aconite, belladonna, and chamomilla. It's got 3 remedies that work. Generally, you take 1 remedy at a time. Otherwise, if it was that easy to take a load in one go, then we just shove the whole like kit down us, and it doesn't work like that. They can kind of cancel each other out because they're energy. But these 3 work really well together: aconite, belladonna, chamomilla. So it's Helios's ABC remedy, and it's basically for fevers, pain, any sore throats, anything that comes on suddenly. Great for kids. So maybe have that instead of aconite. And then the third one I like is ferrum phos, which is just a really good sort of anti-inflammatory again, but maybe more for slower onset issues. But it's really hard to choose 3 because there are,
it's so hard, because like even whenever I'm feeling unwell, I just look at the kit and it's like, okay, it's quite a bit of reading to do now, but it's like you said, it's like there's so many remedies. It doesn't mean that remedy is in that box, isn't it? There's just so many.
Yeah, but you know what, mostly with the 18 remedy kit, or ideally a bigger one, you'll nearly always find the remedy you need in an acute situation, because you don't have to fight. Remember, it's like you as like, it's the homeopathic law of similars, not identical. So as long as it's similar enough, it will work. So, but it takes that little bit of you need to invest a bit of time. And the more you use it, you'll start to know, oh, I get this, I need this when I'm like this, or I need that remedy when I'm like that. But it's only by practicing that you'll get familiar with that.
Okay, great. Final question before we go. Well, 2 final questions. That's a quick one, because you mentioned about find a homeopathic book. You've got loads. So how do you decide which one to You know what I mean? Because I'm looking at
Yeah,
your
I know.
post and you're like, okay, choose a book. And it's like, you've got quite a few different ones. So it's like, how are these ones different to the other?
So there's no, right, in my view, there's no
Yeah.
perfect book, which I am working on something to try and remedy that, because it's like so frustrating that I
Yeah.
have to try and recommend books all the time, and I'm like, oh, this one doesn't do this or this. So at this moment in time, there's not a perfect book for watch
Okay.
this space.
But there's many good books.
Yeah, so I would say you know, you can pick them up pretty cheap secondhand.
Yeah.
I try and post cheap ones. So I like Asa Hershoff's book, which is on my Instagram page. I think it's about £15 possibly. That's a great one. And what else? Lockie's book, which is like a homeopathic prescribing book. You can pick that up secondhand for about £5. So, but there's not a perfect, and what one person likes another person might not like, so you might need to and sometimes I refer to this one if I know it's kid issue. Trisha Allen's book's great for children. So yeah, it's, everyone has got their slight favorites. In my view, there isn't a perfect one, but there's a few that are good.
Okay, great. And what are your plans for the future now?
So now it is, I've completely given up my one-to-one practice. I completely immersed now into just teaching, because I really feel like if people had a homeopathy kit and knew how to use it, most of these chronic issues wouldn't develop in the first place. Like if I know, like with my daughter, if I'd had a homeopathy kit and someone had told me and I'd been open-minded to use it, I could have treated her ear infections and teething and all those things without antibiotics and without Calpol, and she probably wouldn't have gone on to get her autoimmune condition. So that's where I feel like my passion really lies. So I'm now doing my courses, just going to keep expanding, you know, as much information, getting it out there for people that want it, and really trying to educate people, you know, use it in the home, because that is actually the highest form of prescribing homeopathy.
Fantastic. Lisa, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any longer. We've gone a bit over.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate this. I think this is gonna explain a lot of questions, or have answers for a lot of questions that people may have. If you could just let everyone know where they can find you, where they can reach you, and the rest of it.
Yeah, so the best place is actually, well, I was going to say Instagram, but I have been deleted before. So at the moment is Instagram. And why do they want to delete homeopaths is the other thing I would just say. So just Lisa Strbac, LISA STRBAC, or my website, www.lisastrbac, so LISA STRBAC, funny spelling.com. And then you can find information there, but that's, yeah, they're the best places to connect.
Great. Lisa, thank you so much. I hope to be in touch with you soon with posts on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, thank you so much.